Good afternoon. And I'm Lisa Ito-Tapang from the UP College of Fine Arts. I'm also the curator of the UP Fine Arts Gallery, so if ever you go to Quezon City, please visit us. This is an arts college, one of the oldest art schools in the Philippines. And I'll be speaking today as in my capacity as part of that community of the UP College of Fine Arts, as well as organizations which I belong to. I'll go straight to one question, I think, which the presentation earlier compels us to think of. Have we remained passive in the face of such exploitation all these years? And I think not. I just wanted to show you a picture of where I'm from, what the college looks like, what the gallery looks like. We do have a small collection of artworks there. None of it textiles yet, but who knows after the conference. The college has a long history of long and interesting history. It is both a colonial product, being part of the American educational system when it was founded, but it also has a long history of what we would call activism, solidarity with social movements across its history. The gallery, the school, and the formations within this institution are all part of that story. And I wanted to focus on how fabric, the social fabric, all play into the visual culture of Philippine social movements. The art historian Alice Guillermo, she noted that we have different varieties of visual experience, contemporary art, the traditional arts, and everyday life. And I want to focus on some of the things, the everyday things that are part of our culture, are part of ordinary people's lives. I forgot how to, okay. And there are always these moments of rupture and advance in the whole continuum of struggle that was referenced earlier by my two colleagues. They have always, these histories of dissent have always yielded material objects. And I found it very useful to refer to Gillian Rose's concept of sites of critical visual methodology, as well as Manghani's concept of an ecology in images, in trying to grasp the relationship or articulate the relationship between objects, images, and the context that we all represent. An image, an artwork, everything that exists within a larger image system or a larger community with sites of people, production, and the image of self coming into play are very important. And that's the frame by which I'll be sharing stories. Also, as a curator, I found it very interesting as well to look at exhibition histories of objects of demonstration, disobedient objects, and things which we also tried to apply in the gallery, the idea of dissident vicinities and warm bodies. A very tangential, just 30-second demonstration of how this applies in another form that I previously got into, which was effigies. Looking into the history of this form, papier-mâché puppets, usually of presidents, burned during demonstrations, it has an interesting history when applied to the Philippines. They started after, during the post-independence period. Definitely there were before, but afterwards, during the period of martial law, they disappeared along with most forms of legal protests. They resurfaced during the resistance against the dictatorship in the 1980s. Along with expressions of dissent earlier shown, and increasingly became popularized and developed in the demonstrations from the 1990s up to today, where you can still see many good examples of effigies of our presidents being burned or not burned in recent years due to threats. And these are some samples of such. But these are not just objects that are there as agitprop. Each aspect of an object's materials, form, technique, its conceptualization, how it is produced, distributed, even destroyed, has both a symbolic and a practical function. In the case of effigies, for instance, and I'll not go through the whole matrix. Uh, um, Practical aspects such as finding cheaper, easily, readily available materials, building it in a way which is collective, in order to attract media attention to a very compelling message that demonstrators also have a larger symbolic role in society, which is to serve as a sign of larger problems persisting and to serve as a democratic platform for people's participation in various ways. And I was interested in how this applies to the idea of fabrics. Some examples, I'll focus on 4 examples for this presentation. And these are 4 examples which I've been personally involved in or have observed one by one. The Asian Women's Quit on Climate Change banners with the college and with the CAP and with women's organizations. But I'll start with an image that is very personal. And this is a childhood recollection of mine that I was born in the generation after martial law. So personally, I don't have memories of that. What I do have memories of are of people like my grandmothers, Violeta, Rizalina, and my aunt. They were women who taught or tried to teach us how to sew, how to mend clothes, how to do domestic chores, mend used clothes, old blankets to render them usable. My Lola was a Bicolana who migrated to Manila. And the act of sewing fabrics together was a way of passing time. Sometimes it was an act of necessity, but always these were acts of care. And memory has a way of strangely connecting things tangible through time. I led a different life from my grandmother, but when I go back to that, the material of cloth is a constant in retrospect. If I recall the social life of things that threaded through different experiences after, I realize how mundane things like strings, thread, fabric are more entangled in our lives than one normally recognizes on the surface. So another memory comes to mind in relation to that. One much later, but not too recently. 2009, and this was when I was already working as an NGO staff for an environmental organization. At that time, and this is another patch from the past. No, this was a collective project back in 2009, a quilt assembled by women across Asia to take a stand on climate change and its impacts on grassroots sectors. So this was one thing that we worked on during one of the build-up actions to the COP15 back then in Bangkok. So people, different organizations of women, we asked each to bring a swatch each, a simple swatch. In order to convey their calls, we encouraged materials such as recycled materials, traditional fabrics, indigenous, environmentally friendly materials, 3 by 3 feet each. And this was the sample of the call back then under the Philippine Climate Watch Alliance. So several organizations contributed. One thing that I'd like to share would be the One Swatch, for instance, by an Alliance on Gender and Water, which utilized or integrated folk embroidery from different communities across India who used traditional handmade cloth, blue and black, appliques, embroidery, and mirrors to come up with a strong statement of solidarity. So this is the sorry. The quilt is there somewhere. Unfortunately, the postscript to that is the quilt got lost. During the height of, there's a typhoon hitting the COP at that time. No? So it was one unfortunate story that we had. But before that, one work of art, of protest art, which was also the inspiration for this quilt, was something done months earlier, compelling me to post on social media. This is the coolest thing I've seen in years. This was a quilt by a Philippine group, taken during the People's Sauna, or the People's Rally, during the President's State of the Nation address in 2009. It was an even bigger quilt, around the message of enough. And the People's Sauna being traditionally the largest protest of the day, it was a huge call to action during the time of then President Arroyo, portrayed here in effigy. Now, this protest quilt always occurs in a larger ecology of images. The effigy was there, the quilt was there saying enough of Gloria, no to charter change. There were many other expressions of protest used. No, diapers were made into placards. The idea of haute couture in Congress was counterposed with progressive Congress people, Congress women, donning alternative fashion designs, parodying the glamour and the splendor of the administration's fashion choices. So there are all these other expressions of protest around these quilts that I mentioned earlier. Then going nearer to the college, where I spend most of my waking hours, there were chances over the years to also work on several banners with volunteer students and with co-faculty. We like to paint, so we make a lot of banners of these, such as these, every year. But there are times when social movements do ask us to collaborate and cooperate on several banners. One of these, for instance, was a banner with the Center for Women's Studies, commissioned to remember many UP alumni or former students who gave their lives mostly in the struggle against the dictatorship and beyond. So this was made with volunteer sorority members, but having limited access to different kinds of materials, we, of course, used whatever we had at hand, which was LCD projectors. We have a lot of that in school. And cancha, or cheesecloth. And the projection image was relatively easy to make in a period of time. The banner depicted the portraits or the faces of women from Lorena Barros, an anthropology student who fought the dictatorship, up to people who were our own contemporaries at that time, such as Reca Monte. When the state of militarization in Mindanao increased during the time of President Duterte, especially during the time of Duterte, we responded to the call to stop the Lumad killings as the killings in Mindanao were escalating. Again, this was done with very simple materials, paint and fabric. And the students also tried to incorporate motifs or images that they saw from traditional textile patterns as a way to also add significance to the designs that they were making in an otherwise simple banner. So the banner again exists in a larger ecology. It was part of a salubungan or a march which where the whole university community welcomed the Lumad community, hundreds of them who came all the way to Mindanao to seek sanctuary in the schools. An exchange, if accounts are accurate, an exchange of traditional textiles happened between university officials and the Lumad leaders of that time. The banner was carried. There were other artworks such as murals and a makeshift museum which appeared in the next few days after that. The Lumad stayed in UP Diliman for weeks, and their camp out or kampuhan eventually became a more prolonged stay as the harassment increased. What I do remember from this time would be the erection of what could be a proto-institution, the Museo Lumad or Lumad Museum, where indigenous peoples organizations who, coming in solidarity with the Lumads, were invited to bring their own examples of material culture, their stories, photos, and artworks into a makeshift space where temporarily there was a museum erected to celebrate and to commemorate these acts of solidarity and struggle. Another type of cloth banner, which art collectives also engaged with, would be these by Resback and Concerned Artists of the Philippines. I was part of these two groups. I still am part of Concerned Artists of the Philippines, and most of the photos here are shared as such. Resback, or Respond and Break the Silence Against the Killings, was a group founded in 2017. 2016-2017, out of the rage against the successive extrajudicial killings, or EJKs, in Duterte's war against drugs. A banner was made. It was decided that a banner would be made around the concept of mourning pins. And this banner eventually toured the world and the rest, and many other places in the country, as a form of solidarity building among communities and among families of the EJK victims. We used or tried to approximate the practice of mourning pins in making the banner. But since procuring mourning pins, real mourning pins, would be too expensive, we made do with what we had. Someone had a supply of black acrylic. We had access to a fabrication lab and laser cutter nearby and everything. And in the end, hundreds of pins were made, attached to the banner, where it continues to be exhibited today. So the banner was unfurled, exhibited, brought by luggage, hand-carried across different places in order to bring the call, "Stop the Killings," to a larger public. And the slogan emanates from an earlier slogan by human rights organizations who themselves made huge banners to express this. Cloth banners by the Concerned Artists of the Philippines, with a long tradition of making murals, artworks, some of which were stolen, like this. And during the pandemic, we had to resort to different cloths in order to procure materials for these banners. When bringing physical banners wasn't possible all the time, protests went online, such as using art cards, or even making artworks or virtual banners or artworks that reference banners in response. And lastly, I'd like to also cite a very special and continuing example of cloth banners by the peasant women and solidarity groups, Amihan, Gantala Press, and RUA, from 1987 to the present. These groups represent a continuum of feminist organizing. Amihan was founded in 1986, Gantala Press 2015, and RUA 2019. But they all represent a history of organizing among women and solidarity with grassroots women, such as farmers, which created an entire repertoire of very creative artistic forms. Amihan was founded in 1986, and its current national chairperson remains a mentor for many of the sewing projects that it does. Like many of us, she learned sewing from an aunt and a seamstress, but she formally studied dressmaking, worked in a factory, and continues to sew for family amidst, while continuing to organize fellow urban poor and peasant women. So Nanay Zen, for instance, has been sewing while speaking alongside educational fora. Eventually, groups such as Amihan united with other new groups such as Girl Gang Manila, Gantala Press, which is a feminist press, and eventually formed RUA, or Rural Women's Advocates, which is a support group for peasant women. RUA became known for its cloth banners made in solidarity with Amihan, such as these. They would make art workshops, collective banner stitching, exhibits, and wore the calls as they go. I believe there are some RUA members here today, so hello, and you are doing great work. These are some examples that the group shared during their interviews, where the recollection of making cloth banners was not just a recent one, but also something which dates back to the anti-dictatorship movement. The process is collective, like effigies. The materials, also democratic in the sense that they use recycled, cheap materials, and processes which are easy to replicate and teach to a larger community. And in the end, many works from monumental or larger banners to very small ones, but beautifully made ones, are made very quickly, although they do take some time. And if I am to just relate it back to several points earlier, these raw texts on textiles contain calls which name social problems, but which in turn signify broader context of structural inequality at work. The slogan, stitched, sewn, or embroidered through time, there are more than 30 here, just based on accounting the photographs alone. All speak of a continuous history of militarization, of dispossession of land, and of life that happens all across the archipelago. But it also speaks of yung continuous struggle to fight back. Banners as materials and metaphors are accessible to more people, especially those from different backgrounds. These connect us to a longer history and a broader context of struggle. And since they take time to make, whether by yourself or by many people, they compel one to make time, or to create time to listen, converse, consider, consolidate, and care. They attract attention, and that helps amplify the messages, the many meaningful messages that they carry. And unlike effigies, which are deliberately designed to be burned as part of their purpose, these banners have the capacity or the potential to live on, to be recycled, reused, and to be part of this continuous creation of a community. One of them said, "It's really not about the object in the end. We can make a new banner. I do not downgrade the object, but it's about the time that we make together." And I think that's one special aspect of crafting, of making, from fabrics to textiles, that the examples of cloth banners leaves us with, that they create a community which makes time to struggle together. These are my references, and I would like to thank the whole group of people who have been part of the stories that I tried to tell. Thank you very much.